in solitude. You're not ever truly alone if you have support, if you have people that you can lean on. But it's a solo journey. No one could heal my pain or take away my pain or get the lessons for me that my grief was trying to give me. I had to go inward and extract those lessons. Today, we're back with part 3 of a new series called The Upgrade. We're talking about how do you actually create the identity change and transformation that's required in order to have everything you desire. The next level of success, next level of abundance and fulfillment lies in your ability to become the version of you who's ready to hold it. But how do you actually do that? Well, in this series, we're breaking down what this process looks like into 5 phases that they aren't linear. It's not a perfect roadmap, but I think it'll give you context to know where you're at in your own transformation journey and feel a little bit less alone in the process. So if you're just picking up the series at this point, I highly recommend going back and listening from the beginning with phase 1, because this is a process that, while it's not linear, it does tend to follow a trajectory that builds upon itself. Each phase has such medicine and such gifts if we're willing to see it, but we can't bypass the phase beforehand and get to the gifts of this season if we haven't fully surrendered to the transformation that's trying to happen in the previous season. So today we're going to talk about a topic that we've done a lot of podcasts on. It's simply called the gap. The gap is a phase of the transformation process. It's a phase, a very intentional phase of an identity upgrade. And it's this space between who you were and who you're becoming. And when I think about what I used to believe about growth and change and transformation, I didn't factor in that the gap can sometimes be a pretty long phase. It's this space between the identities where you're not really clear on who you're becoming yet. You just know you're not the same person you once were. And there isn't really a clear direction. There's no plan. There's just space. And if you're someone like me who's not really comfortable with space, it can be really disorienting. It can feel really quiet. So I want to give some verbiage to what's happening in the gap. If you've never listened to a previous podcast about the gap, this will give you just enough to be dangerous. But if you are really feeling this season right now, you can go back. We've done a lot of different podcasts on the topic of the gap and how to support yourself through it. But I feel like I'm in this place now in my own transformation journey where I also have a much different relationship to the gap. When I started to talk about the gap, I was definitely in one, but I couldn't quite pinpoint how it tied together and where it was leading me. Where now I have a little bit of a different perspective to the entire journey and this identity upgrade that was happening. I was just coming to you live from right smack dab in the gap. So those podcasts might really speak to you, especially if you're right there right now, because it's more of a firsthand perspective versus being able now to look back and see what was actually happening in that season when I was in it. But here's, I think, one of the most uncomfortable things about being in the gap. It's almost this sense of shame because, especially as an entrepreneur or as an ambitious woman or someone who's always kind of been up to big things, you kind of feel this pressure, like the world is always asking, like, well, what's next? What are you working on next? What are you working towards? What are you excited about? And in the gap, I found myself for the first time ever with no answer to that question. In fact, anything that I tried to say or make up was just like, had no energy to it. So it's because this gap is the place of gestation. It's kind of like the womb space of your transformation. It's somewhere that you don't quite know where you're going next because you're not supposed to. It might even look the same as your previous life on the outside, but inside, everything is shifting. And I find that the gap, so while the last phase we talked about, the unraveling, is the one that most people avoid, I feel like the gap is the phase that most people try to rush either forward because they don't want to sit in the stillness, or they try to reach backward. And you've been through an unraveling of sorts. You're starting to get to this place of, sometimes you're still unraveling and you're in the gap at the same time. Again, these aren't linear, like checking a box off phases, but there's just a different energy to each of them. And the gap is really more about stillness. And that stillness sometimes can be even more uncomfortable than the unraveling itself. So this is something interesting to point out. Some of us tend to avoid discomfort. So we want to cling to safety when we're being forced to shed and, go inward and do this really deep work. Some of us have a much harder time just being still. And so you're going to find yourself challenged in one way or another. I somehow found myself challenged with both, but I actually think I am more comfortable with the unraveling than I am with stillness and than I am with the gap. So if you can stay in it, the gap is actually a portal. It's the space where your nervous system is recalibrating. It's learning to hold everything that you want, but it's also learning to hold uncertainty. And being able to hold uncertainty is actually necessary if you want to create an expansion, because expansion is inherently uncertain. It's like if you could predict it, if you could control it, it wouldn't be a true expansion. It would just still be in the known. So the stillness of the gap has different medicine than the unraveling. And I would bet that you're going to find yourself having a harder time with one over the other. The gap is also where I think your inner knowing gets louder. If you can really create the stillness and the silence that the gap is asking you to. It's also where boundaries get stronger, because the gap is a place of stillness. It's a place of rest, of recalibration. And you don't truly get to the gap and get to experience the benefits of it if you aren't creating those boundaries. You're going to start to notice that maybe part of your unraveling is this deep discomfort with places that you've allowed your boundaries to be overstepped, or deep discomfort with not having any boundaries at all. And then that's the action that needs to be taken. And maybe some relationships unravel as a result. And now you find yourself in a point of stillness. But the gap is really where boundaries can and should get stronger, because boundaries are always required for any upgrade. New boundaries absolutely are required. And because you're in this place of integration and stillness, it's actually where your new self starts coming online. Not through action, but again, through the key word here is integration. Because you're not performing as much, you're listening deeper. You are not outsourcing as many answers because you are creating more solitude and stillness. So you're deepening your self-trust. And I think one of the key tenets of the gap, and this is the way I kept describing it when I was in the gap, is that you learn the difference between loneliness and solitude. It's funny because, Powerhouse Women is built around the mantra that we're not meant to do business or life alone. And I still believe that. I still believe that community and support and having others around us who are going through these transformation journeys alongside us, or even if they're in a different phase, it's like you're with people who really get it. But there are certain phases, and the gap is one, that are a little bit more of a solo journey. And I remember going through, such a deep shedding last year and sitting in more stillness than I ever had. And realizing that everything in me, especially when I was feeling really triggered, when I was feeling really uncomfortable, everything in me wanted to take certain actions as a way to avoid feeling what the stillness and the solitude and the silence were bringing to the surface. So I wanted to reach out for support. Not that I shouldn't reach out for support. I want to be really clear here. But sometimes I just wanted to reach out and tell my side of the story or tell someone why I was the victim. And I wanted to be validated in how I felt because I was actually being asked to find that validation within myself. So I share this to say that there's this beautiful balance between supporting ourselves with the relationships and the people who can just make us feel heard and seen, especially if we're in an unraveling and a gap and an identity upgrade. But then intuitively, I could kind of feel where I was just being asked to sit in silence and solitude and stillness, all the S's, and just feel my feelings, not rush them away or try to have someone else take them away. So while I still believe we're not meant to do business or life alone, there will be parts of your transformation journey, of your healing journey that are going to be most powerful walked alone, in solitude. You're not ever truly alone if you have support, if you have people that you can lean on. But it's a solo journey. No one could heal my pain or take away my pain or get the lessons for me that my grief was trying to give me. I had to go inward and extract those lessons. So the solitude of the gap is really one of the biggest gifts because it disconnects you from the external things that you would typically lean on for immediate gratification. So what happens in the gap is you're walking with this intention that it feels slow in the moment, but it actually makes your rebirth, your identity transformation more sustainable, more embodied. It takes time to embody a whole new identity. It does not happen overnight. And part of that is the detachment from the things and the people and the ways of operating of your previous self. You kind of need this buffer in between your previous self and your new self. So how do you know if you're in a gap? I think if you've been following along with these episodes and you understand what the invitation felt like, what the unraveling felt like, in comparison, the gap probably feels a lot more quiet. You may still feel the sense that your foundation has been rocked. You don't know what's next. Again, that's still a little bit like residual from the previous phases. But I think the biggest sign that you are in the gap or kind of being ushered into the gap is that you just are craving more solitude. You're craving more rest. You're craving more space. And the mantra for this phase, I feel, is this mantra I had to adopt and I had to tell myself over and over and over again when I was really in it last year, is the reminder that stillness is not the same as laziness. Stillness is not the same as laziness. Because it felt so lazy to a previous version of me, the very version I was trying to shed, whether I realized it or not, is the same version that could not just be still. So it felt very uncomfortable. And I had to remind myself of that all the time. You might have a sense of FOMO, like fear of missing out, because you feel the need to pull back, or even guilt for pulling away or saying no and not being as social, to preserve that need for stillness. And it might feel a little bit lonely, especially if stillness is something that's kind of uncomfortable, and being with yourself and really observing yourself and observing the patterns that you want to shift is uncomfortable. It can definitely feel lonely. But there's also, at its core, there is this subtle but undeniable growing level of self-trust. And it's so beautiful. If you really are in it and if you're clearing the space to feel the feelings and allow yourself to process the emotion, and yes, supporting yourself where you can, but also just receiving the medicine that stillness can offer. At the bottom of it, sometimes you gotta sit with that for a while. You may just notice this deeper level of self-trust starting to emerge. So what we really need in this phase, and if you're supporting someone who's going through this phase, is just permission to say more no's than yeses, and to say, yes to the things that are only like a full body F yes, to clear energetic boundaries, like to really enforce boundaries, to clear up any lingering boundary oversteps, even if it's with people who are really well-meaning. It's a season that if you're not used to feeling selfish, it might feel a little bit selfish. It's also a season of deep nervous system support. So I think I did all the things. I took long walks. I did sound baths. I did all slow movement. I was really recalibrating my nervous system while I was in the gap last year. A lot of silence, a lot of time alone. I pretty much stopped watching TV altogether. Anything that could have been a numbing tool, I intentionally pulled back from, because I knew that the goal isn't to speed through the gap, but the way to prolong it is to numb ourselves. So, for me, that was not really drinking, not really watching TV, minimizing social media consumption. Anything that I would turn to in order to numb and not feel, I did the opposite. And I would create space and time to feel my feelings. I think it's important to support ourselves by cultivating connection with a few safe people. And I definitely had those safe people that I could connect with, but also massive compassion for yourself. Massive compassion, especially if you're someone who is used to having a clear plan and a goal that you're charging forward toward. That can often be the most uncomfortable part of the stillness, is that you're not really working that hard toward the next thing, because you don't even know if the next thing is the thing that you want. So keep those things in mind. If you're currently in the gap, if you're sensing that like, wow, I just am really wanting more stillness and solitude. And then here are a couple of like tactical things that you can do to support yourself, whether you're in the gap, these daily actions that, again, I don't want to pose this as though the goal is to speed through it, because you can't really rush this. But it's a way to make sure that you're extracting all of the gifts that the gap has to offer, because there are so many. So the first one is, any nervous system rituals that really support you. So it could be things like breath work or somatic movements, yoga, dance. I think this is where intuitively you'll notice you're drawn toward certain things. But anything that's going to teach your body that uncertainty does not equal danger. Part of the recalibration of the gap is starting to reframe our relationship with uncertainty and make it feel in our nervous system, rewire on a subconscious level that uncertainty can feel safe. We can feel safe knowing that we've got us. The other thing to do is to really create that sacred intentional space for solitude. And the point of this is so you can hear your own voice again, so you can hear your own intuition. So maybe this is just as simple as like taking a walk or driving in the car without a podcast or without music playing. Taking a walk in nature is a big one for me. Being in a place that I feel my nervous system relaxing, like being in nature, is really supportive. Things like journaling, meditation, whatever's going to help you hear your own voice again. And then on the topic of boundaries, I think really having these check-ins where it's like your calendar and the reality of your life versus what your real capacity is. So asking yourself, just because I have time technically in my calendar, do I actually have the emotional capacity to say yes to this, to take on this task? Just because your goals at one point were, X, doesn't mean that in this new season, your goals are going to stay the same. So ask yourself, are your goals aligned with the person you're becoming? Check in regularly, because especially in the gap, you're going to find that the integration goes so deep that especially your relationship to your goals is likely to change, and it should. So just pay attention to that. Are your goals aligned with who you're becoming or with the version of you who you're releasing? And that's sometimes a really tough conversation to sit with, but so powerful. And then, this one is tough. Like this next one. I hate it. I just want to go on record. Resist the urge to achieve through the discomfort. Back to my note about numbing, one of my favorite ways to numb was just to go out and achieve something and get the dopamine hit. But if you really want to surrender to what the gap has to offer, I want you to choose integration over achieving to numb the discomfort. Just let your body actually feel the difference between the two. And I'm still in the process of this. It's so uncomfortable. It's so new. It's so foreign. But it's also realigning me with a more authentic way of achieving than I was previously doing. So that's number 4. Again, I don't like that one, but it's necessary. The 5th one, and this is a theme you're going to notice in this whole process, because building trust with yourself is actually a big part of an identity upgrade, is keep following those small intuitive nudges every day. That's what the whole point of having space is, to be able to hear those nudges even more clearly. And specifically, if you're someone who likes to see results, remember the gap is a quiet phase. So take the small actions, follow those nudges without needing proof that it's going to work out the way that you want or produce a specific result. You build self-trust by taking the intuitive action and releasing the outcome. So let's just remind ourselves what is happening in the gap. This is not a delay. This is your upgrade. You are expanding your capacity in this moment to hold more. And that expansion requires time. So trust what feels really quiet right now. You don't see the path forward. You're not supposed to yet. You're being invited inward, and you're being aligned with the version of you who can actually walk the path that's destined for you. The gap creates space. It invites you to get quiet. And the whole reason the gap is quiet is to allow you to remember who you really are. And the remembering is the next phase of the upgrade. And we're going to go so much deeper into that in the next episode. I'll see you there.